These are 6-year-olds, and within just 1 hour, they know more about how Bitcoin works and where it came from than a sitting U.S. congressman.
I don't believe that Satoshi Nakamoto was innovative.
They might even know more about Bitcoin than you. What do you think about Bitcoin?
I have no idea, and I think it's just whatever.
Bitcoin, I heard about its cryptocurrency.
Bitcoin is super made up, like it's just like doesn't exist before.
I don't know how it works, so I don't really care.
Do you know who created it?
No.
No.
I probably can't say.
Some guy in his mom's basement.
Do you know how many there are?
No.
How many Bitcoins?
A lot.
A lot?
It's a lot.
Too many to count.
Honestly, it's not my industry and I don't know much about it.
Do you think that we should know, or do you think it's okay we just use them?
We should know.
It all begs an important question. Have we been learning about Bitcoin the wrong way?
How many times have you suddenly started to hear people talk about these Bitcoins?
It doesn't produce anything. You can stare at it all day and no little Bitcoins come out or anything like that.
I give my real dollars to Bitcoin and I establish a Bitcoin virtual currency account. That's how it works. What?
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today we have Julian, which is a filmmaker and host of Kinetic Finance. If you don't know Julian and his channel, please push pause and check him out. You will have in the comments down below all the links. Let's go with the most important question. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I was just on a shoot in Calgary. We were filming a documentary for this artist who makes really cool, I want to call it like punk and kind of grungy art, physical art. That is almost like, they're almost like monuments to Bitcoin and the importance of Bitcoin within culture. So his name's Madex. But I spent 3 days out there in his studio. We went dirt biking, traveling around, Calgary and shooting some really cool stuff. So the next month, I'm just going to be toiling away on that edit.
Wow, sounds amazing. I actually love your take on videos. They are super educational, but you have a different perspective content, which I love so much. So I'm super happy that you're here with us today. And how did you get into Bitcoin? I mean, how everything started?
First time I got into Bitcoin, it was to purchase things on the internet, let's just say. And so I did that, and then I never paid attention to it for another 3 years. And then in 2016, I started hearing a little bit more about it and found Ethereum actually kind of first, and was interested by that because I had used Bitcoin a couple times. But then, Ethereum, when I heard of it, I heard about smart contracts and all these things and this way to make programmable money that was still decentralized. And it was so interesting to me. And what I did is I was a broke university student. I had like $3,000 left to my name. I put half of it into Ethereum, the other half into some stocks. Within 3 days of me buying that Ethereum, the DAO hack happened. And I learned very quickly what 50% down in 3 days looks like. But because it was kind of, FU money, I could have made that back in a couple, weeks or months of work. I didn't really pay much attention to it. Best decision I ever made was the first one, which was to not panic sell. And, Ethereum ended up doing really well. And I was really into that whole space, crypto, blockchain, ended up moving it kind of slowlier into Bitcoin because Bitcoin was also doing well. And basically it afforded me the financial independence to kind of just start doing whatever I wanted. And I was working in film production as an editor for quite a few years. And after, Ethereum and Bitcoin did really well, I basically decided, hey, I have enough, capital here to buy some of my own film equipment and, kind of start my own studio. And so in 2018, I launched my own production company to basically do things like advertisements and corporate videos and animations. And some of the first clients that we worked with were actually cryptocurrency companies and doing some of their videos. And it's cool because the first thing that I got out of, cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin was the ability to become sovereign. I had my own business and, we've been creating things now for about 5 years. And it was about 2020. And of course, probably so many stories of people that you've talked to kind of begin with, oh, it was during COVID that everything changed, then COVID happened and then everything changed. And similar thing for me where COVID happened, all the businesses shut down. Most people were having a terrible time. I had the most insane surge of business because one of the things that we started doing was videos for Amazon products. And of course, Amazon blew up during COVID. And so we had this just wave of unprecedented demand. At the peak of it, I had like 6 or 7 full-time employees, and we were just cranking out these videos on Amazon products. We were doing dozens a month and almost a week at one point. And my business just skyrocketed from that. And then I ended up realizing, oh man, I have all this like cash and I don't know what to do with it all. And then what do you know? Michael Saylor comes out and he's talking about how, yeah, we have this problem too at our business. And we've decided to put it all into Bitcoin. And I was like, okay, I know about Bitcoin, but I've never thought about putting my business cash in it. I thought it was always good to have a rainy day fund. And then that's when I really started digging into what is money, right? What is money? What is inflation? The history of central banking, the hardness of different assets. That's when I stopped looking at it as sort of this just like speculative thing, like, and more of this is a savings technology. This is, the future or the evolution of money as we know it. Put a lot of my money into Bitcoin around the same time that Michael Saylor started talking about it in August of 2020. And then, yeah, like the rest is history. I got really into that. And then I decided, man, people need more education on this stuff. I've got a whole, studio full of film equipment. Why don't I make some videos about this stuff? And I was already experimenting in 2019 with a couple, but it wasn't frequent. But in 2020, 2021, I really started ramping it up. And basically now I've sort of quit my own business or winded it down to essentially just myself and like one other person, kind of like part-time, whatever stuff, to focus exclusively on making educational stuff about Bitcoin. Because what I saw as I was learning about Bitcoin was that everything that I was getting, I had to kind of like sit and toil through. And it wasn't that the content was bad, but it was, you would sit down and you would spend, 10, 15 hours per one of these amazing Bitcoin books, where you'd sit and you'd listen to podcasts of Andreas Antonopoulos and Michael Saylor and all these people talking. And it was great stuff. But inevitably, when you're listening to these long 2-hour podcasts, you get repetitious conversations and repetitious themes throughout these books. And then, they say to learn or to understand anything, you kind of need like 1,000 hours. But I really think that you can densify a lot of this stuff, and you can also make it a lot more interesting for the average person who is working a 9 to 5, which doesn't have a lot of time, which doesn't want to be talked at with, inflation data and charts and all that, and just wants to be told an interesting story and wants to see the perspective of something in a way that is something that they could share with a friend or family member, or just be kind of like, taken out of their world for a second. I think that's the most, the biggest issue with a lot of the crypto content that we have is it's not really escapism. The escapism comes in the form of the hopium and people telling you this is my price projection. But otherwise, it's conversations that are very technical and very, they don't resonate with you that much usually, unless there's like a really emotional component to the story. And I was finding that like the more and more that I listened to Bitcoin content and crypto content, the stuff that really stuck with me was the stories of how it was being used in other countries around the world, and, really impacting people's stories of how Bitcoin changed their life. And so I thought we should take those, and instead of having them just be things that people talk about on conferences or podcasts, make them into these really visual, captivating stories. And that's sort of been my mission for the last year and a half, is to kind of find the most interesting stories in Bitcoin and make basically little documentaries out of them, and kind of bring people to escape, the fiat world for a little bit and just see the future that we're creating, whether it's Bitcoin miners being used to, heat up massive facilities and then, making the mining profit and then also selling the heat, or seeing what Bitcoin looks like in a small town in Guatemala, or what it looks like in El Salvador, or traveling with one of the Canadian truckers for 48 hours and him explaining his story about how, that helped them, raise money during the protest. There's so many stories out there. And so that's been my mission and will continue to be my mission for years. I think it's just finding all of those and presenting them in new ways. Yeah, I'm just really passionate about just more storytelling in the Bitcoin space. And for any amount of time in the foreseeable future, I see myself doing that.
I completely agree with you. There is so much out there and yet so little. So from someone who has no idea what cryptocurrency is, if you ask me, it's really complicated. Everything's super hard, and there is very little information. I mean, 4% of the people are in crypto in 2023. So it's a small amount of the population involved in crypto. And then, like you said, naturally, when you do a Google search or you go on YouTube, you will find people wanting to shill some tokens or buy this NFT, make millions, and buy this token and it goes to zero the next week, whatever. Or on the other side, like you said, you have Michael Saylor, you have Max Kaiser, you have all these people. They've taken the orange pill, as they say, but they are super technical and they talk for hours. And the average person doesn't have that. I think they target a a very specific bunch of people, like maybe me and you, that we already know and we want to know more. But to get people, to catch people into wanting to know more, we need people like you creating a different form of content, maybe shorter, maybe more creative, maybe more appealing to the quote average person. Because, you know, if you think about it, I didn't know what money was either. I thought getting a job 8 to 5 and then getting a mortgage was the greatest thing to do, because, hey, you pay rent, you know. So this is what I you know, my education, my financial education was, which was terrible, because it's probably one of the worst idea you can put on financial advice. But so then you have to go into a journey, into a self journey, and say, okay, so how do I learn what is money?
Like I literally have this as like a sign.
There you go. I love it. You know, who do you listen to? So some people are saying good things about Bitcoin and crypto. Other people are saying bad things. Like Bill Gates is extremely bearish about everything. So if you are someone who read whatever he says, then naturally you are like, nah, I'm not interested in these things. So keeping your mind open is one thing. Now it's coming more accessible, I think, but still, like you said, it's super hard. And I love, by the way, Michael Cera is my favorite. I watch all his videos, but it's not for everybody. So having someone like you with a background of filmmaking coming out and trying to explain in a more soft way, I think, or a more creative way, I think is very much needed. Hence why I came across your channel and I was like, finally, refreshing. I think you have one video you asking kids, called Kids Understand Bitcoin Better and Grown Up, something like this. Which is fantastic. You know, that kind of perspective, I think, is very much needed.
I think that's the thing, right? Is that you said you're like a UX designer. That's kind of your background, right? I've developed this belief really recently that open protocols need two things, and they don't have them inherently. And that is, they can only survive if they have good UX and good UI designers. An open protocol will never succeed unless there are the people that can build it and make it usable for everyone else. And the other thing that they need is they need marketers. They need people to explain it over and over and over and over and over until people kind of understand it and start incorporating it and using it. And then eventually they become so seamless that we are not even, you know, aware that we're using it. Like a lot of the protocols that underlie the internet or email and things like that. But you need to have storytellers, and you need to have people who can create beautiful, you know, software and interfaces in which we can interact with these open protocols. And without those two things, the protocols, they fail every single time. They need the design people and they need the storytellers.
When I look into this kind of blockchain interaction with our society, it's going to drastically change entirely. And again, we've seen with NFTs, we were discussing it earlier, you know, people see NFTs are just like, there's nothing, it's just a JPEG. Well, it's a contract, it's digital ownership. For now, there is just a JPEG inside, but it could be your house, it could be your ID, it could be so many different, a ticket for a concert. Now the technology is not ready. I mean, people are playing the technology, let me rephrase it, but we will see them coming in super aggressive, and they will change, I believe, our lives entirely. And wait until a huge giant, which it could be Google, it could be Apple, they're going to, because they will integrate the blockchain somewhat, somehow. So there's an opportunity, like you said, for people to study and to get some knowledge, because there will be many jobs made entirely on a new sector, exactly like internet. You know, now you have people called influencers. You have people on social media, their entire job is to promote products. Think about going back to my grandmother and explain to her that one day in 2023, there's going to be people and their job is to take her phone, which has a video camera, go live into the internet and promote products, and they make a commission. I mean, it's just too far-fetched.
The amazing thing about the internet is that it finally created a place so that the market could decide what art and, you know, creative endeavors were valuable and what ones weren't. Because before then, like if you did not have a agent, whether it's an art dealer, whether it's a talent agent, whether you work within a media company, you couldn't be discovered. Your skills could not be discovered unless you got a job and you worked underneath a label. Now you push stuff out and you hope that the algorithms find you. But generally, if you're talented enough and you're consistent and you push, your stuff breaks through to people, right? Like, I mean, you found me, I've had all these amazing conversations with people, and I just broke 10,000 on YouTube, but I have talked to people with like hundreds of thousands and millions of followers that say, hey, like I've seen your stuff and I love it. And I mean, that to me is just, it's an impossibility without the openness of the internet for that stuff to ever get found in society. You know, an independent, you know, artist or creator back in the day, let's just say you're a musician, right? You'd go to bars and you'd play your music at bars, and you'd hope one day that there was somebody really talented who could spot your talent in that bar. But that's locked down to a physical, geolocation, versus now anybody in any country can find you at any moment and you never know when. That's how markets are made. That's kind of like the liquidity of the talent ecosystem now is only possible because of the internet. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Super well said. And I agree also that there is a fundamental part missing with the internet, which is digital ownership, or like there is so much that we moved into digital nowadays, but we haven't figured out many things. For example, when it comes to ownership, it could be music, it could be the video you watch, content you download. It's very much centralized. So you have a bunch of companies, you have Googles, you have all those guys, the giant tech, they control everything and they monetize on us. So having these kind of decentralized ledger coming in and saying, hey, wait a second, there is another way to do things. I remember back in the days when MySpace was a thing and then Facebook popped up, and nobody was, what is Facebook at? MySpace, it was cool. It was your page. They took over because they gave people more feature. But then for God knows how long, many years, we are the product, because when you don't pay, it's because you are the product, right? So if you think about what those giants do with your data, Google does, Facebook does, and by the way, they acquired all those companies. Think about Instagram has been acquired by, but now it's called Meta, but think about LinkedIn has been bought by Microsoft. So those entrepreneurs, they started some stuff, and a few years later, those giants, they didn't have time to explore the new technology. They simply acquired them later on. So I think now we will see many companies coming up with some amazing ideas. They will then later acquired by some giants that they don't have time to investigate. And I think we will be paid to watch content. We will be we will be rewarded in some sort of for our time or attention. We will have a different experience using the web, and we will, I think, somewhat kind of take some of it back. I mean, the average person doesn't care about decentralized, to be honest. They don't even know what it is. They don't care. They just want to know what's in for them. But I'm sure there's going to be people which their entire job is going to be watch content. They will get paid for it. But I mean, we're not there yet, I think. I wonder what's your view in here, but I think we will see in the few years coming forward a different digital interaction, I think, even within each other.
I think like one of the bedrocks, when you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is kind of this concept of ownership. And I think up until basically the advent of Bitcoin, when we thought of ownership, and we thought of like, how do you enforce, how does someone prove that you own anything? It's basically the state helps you do it, right? If you have something like a car has a license plate, and that is kept on a ledger by the state, and that proves that if someone steals your car, well, they're stealing from you. If they break into your house, they're violating your property because you have the title deed to that house. And so everything has been defined in terms of ownership by governments. But we know, and this goes beyond money, that those rights can be basically violated by the person who holds it at any time, right? Eminent domain, governments can go in and say, hey, your house is on land that I want. Here's your payout. Bye-bye. Property rights are violated, right? You could live in a much more dictatorial country too, and then you're really only leasing property from the government. Like, I don't know in China if people have full property rights anywhere. I think you're technically always leasing. Property rights are like what make us, feel whole. They drive everything. They drive every incentive. They drive generational wealth. They drive our feeling that we're not slaves and that we're living, as free, sovereign individuals. And they're more important than ever, I think, today, because you have so many people who are crossing country to country, moving and finding their way. Immigrants in the last 100 years that define what nations are, and immigrants that are leaving to find opportunity on other shores. And when you move countries, it's really hard to transport those property rights. But now, because of Bitcoin, because we can have these digital property rights that are the same no matter where on earth we're living in, we have the opportunity to experience that feeling and those inalienable rights of ownership anywhere we are at any time. And all we really need to do is remember a couple of words and protect those words with all the power we have vested in us and our families. And that's a really, really powerful concept. And I think in a world where people feel like they own less and less, they feel like they're renters until they're in their 40s, or they're just constantly in debt. Restoring the sense of ownership, I think, is really important. and to give people things like a proper savings account to give people, something that verifies that they own something in any part of the world is important. The challenge is always, and I always challenge the NFT and the crypto community, is that the Bitcoin stuff, it's really good at verifying ownership of digital properties, but it can't really work for verifying physical ownership. That stuff still needs to be kind of enforced by the state at some point, right? Because, what good are physical ownership rights if no one's gonna, come to your aid if someone tries to steal it from you, right? You have the ability to protect your own property and stuff like that, through owning guns or whatever. So digital ownership, now that we can have full ownership of our money, now that we can have full ownership of our digital rights and digital proofs, it opens up a whole world of, I think, human flourishing, because I think the bedrock of Renaissance and great art it stems from this idea that you own the fruits of your labor. You are not being subjected to slavery to create what you need to create on behalf of someone else. That whatever you create, you can actually possess and own 100% of, and it's inalienable. When people feel that, when people are empowered by those rights, that's when they create their best works. That's the potential that, to me, Bitcoin harnesses. It presents this potential to give artists this true sense of ownership that they've never had before, in almost all of humanity. And they can travel, do whatever with their art. They can do whatever with the products of their labor, their savings accounts, and absolutely nobody can take it away from them if it is stored and secured properly.
By the way, ownership is by far also my favorite topic, because when you think about it, exactly like you said, so well said, when you think about what is that you own nowadays, and when you talk to people, they don't think about what most of the time, they say, oh, real estate. No, you don't have real estate. It's not yours. Think about, sadly, look what happened in Ukraine and Russia. If you are someone who had properties, if you are a Russian person who had property somewhere else in Europe, they're not yours anymore. They've taken it away. There is someone somewhere who is allowing you to keep something, but it's not yours. You are technically leasing it. So then, we all know the fiat is depreciating itself. The dollar is destroying itself. Any currency is going to zero. It's just a matter of time. It's just a long time. So how do I protect myself? Okay, well, I'll give you an example. I was in London and I purchased some gold. But I basically have your gold locked up into a cavo, and there is a guy with a gun guarding it. So that's not mine. It's theirs. Do you see what I mean?
And they tell you, oh yeah, well, if anything happens to it, we have insurance, right? And so if someone breaks into the safe, they beat up our security guard, they steal your gold, we'll send Interpol to track them down, but we also have insurance to cover the value of your gold or whatever, right? And so it's like we have all these long-winded mechanisms sometimes to protect people's property rights. All you really need is like a digital proof, right?
Exactly. And then good luck in moving to Dubai from London. I can't just take the gold into some plastic bags and go to the airport, to the customs and say, hello, this is my gold. Yeah, right. It's not portable, it's not divisible. And even if I could, okay, now I have a bar of gold here in my house, which, what can I take a knife and take a little bit out to buy some water? It's not going to work. So it's not, clearly nothing against gold. I think it's done fantastic, but exactly like you said, the digital ownership is going to come in and solve so many problems. But also at the same time, I agree with you. It creates other problems. When you become the custodian, then you also have the responsibility. And if you forget the passphrases or the words or whatever, there's no one you can call. Hence why a bank were invented, because people didn't want the responsibility to say, hey, I don't want to be a bank. I'd rather point my finger and say, hey, it was your job to take care of me. I'll take you in court, whatever. So hence why bank flourished over time, because, people like to say, hey, I don't want responsibilities. But for some, they want, like me, I want responsibilities, and I take whatever, means necessary, which means I also take responsibility of my actions. If I forget my words, then it's game over, it's gone.
Why do we consider our Bitcoin, our rights to our Bitcoin kind of inalienable, right? Because the ledger is decentralized, number one, but the way in which it's decentralized through proof of work is something that is mathematically and bureaucratically inalienable. There are very few people come up with hypothetical situations all the time. Oh, what if, all the mining pools collude together to 51% attack the network? Okay, then all the miners who are incentivized to go with the original chain, who understand the 21 million, the scarcity, all that, they just leave the pool the next day, right? And there's all these different game theory things that you can play out of what if quantum computing happens, and what if this happens, what if that happens? And there are good retorts to each of them. The network has been designed sufficiently enough that the good actors who actually understand the asset that they have will not participate in any scheme to violate that property in any which way. That's why the Bitcoin forks have been the most contentious of almost any fork that's happened. That's why the Ethereum fork was so contentious at the time, but clearly the Ethereum community erred on the side of kind of like bureaucratic decision making by kind of saying, hey, this hack happened, let's violate, that guy's transactions, right? The problem I see with the other blockchains, and if they've been around long enough, they just have like a record in which they violated the rights of either some or majority of the users' property rights, is that you'll have a thing like the DAO hack, which is just like, well, we don't think that hacker's, thing by breaking the code and by, targeting this one exploit in another side protocol. We don't believe he should have rights to the main chain. It's never happened with Bitcoin. We've never rolled back the Bitcoin chain to take away a hacker's Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoiners understand that like the responsibility rests on the individual. We're not bailing out anyone in these circumstances. And now Ethereum and these other chains, as they've moved to proof of stake, they're in this situation where there's very few stakeholders that control the network. And should there be an exploit of any kind, we know the playbook. We know that the rollback will happen if a big enough chunk of the money gets moved or stolen or whatever. And we also know that if that's a possibility, that also means that there's perfect amounts of coercion by the government that can take place to move these organizations to roll back the chain or to violate people's property rights as well. And then essentially you're losing the entire promise and aspect of these protocols. We haven't seen, the US government step in and say, hey, take that person's, Bitcoin out of that address, or sorry, not Bitcoin, Ethereum out of that address, or freeze this or freeze that. But we have seen like OFAC go in, blacklist Ethereum addresses. We've seen the exchanges comply in violating that fungibility. And it doesn't really exist as much on Bitcoin, and it can't really exist in the long term because of the Bitcoiners just understand that if your Bitcoin gets stolen, like tough titties, right? And if we vote for a soft fork or a hard fork that messes up the network, we have to own that, and we have to kind of make it right. And if it comes at the cost of the value of our coins, it's like, so be it. We failed as a community. We're not going to roll back this. We're not going to do bailouts. We're not going to host our nodes on Amazon Cloud, so that they become like a weak point. So that's what makes Bitcoin special to me, is that you have all these other platforms and they're attempting to offer digital property rights through things like NFTs, but they already have this track record of having those property rights violated in some way. And most users would say, oh, who cares? It was like a one-off thing early in Ethereum's life. But these things matter. These things matter. And I think you've seen it over other chains. The more that they do this subtle violation of property rights, the more that people just leave it and they go towards the hardest, most solid chain. And even though Ethereum did this thing way back when, the other chains have had much more egregious violations of property rights, whether it's the whole network going down like Solana, rollbacks, whether it's things like, too rigid OFAC compliance. You can see the funds draining out of those things and just moving back to Bitcoin and Ethereum because they have the hardest property rights of all the chains. The market is very good at finding, the purpose of these things and finding the price, the signals through the price discovery, and finding the utility of these things. So blockchains violate people's property rights in any way. They've essentially lost all function and purpose. I don't need a decentralized ledger if it can be centralized by a couple people. You can't sell me on this idea of decentralization ever if you have a track record of essentially violating that for X circumstance or Y circumstance. I won't tolerate it. If I lose my coins by virtue of me not securing my private keys or investing in a bad contract or whatever, I have to own that, no bailouts. And that's the way it should be. That should be the world that we want to aspire to, is radical sovereignty and responsibility.
Something Bitcoin has that no one else has is the fact that we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto.
Very important.
Exactly, because you can pinpoint, think about Ethereum. You can say, okay, Vitalik Buterin, we know who you are. We can pressure you, right? Satoshi Nakamoto, it was most likely a group of people, as they say, but we don't know. We're all speculating. So where do you go? How do you stop it? So that's fundamental to, like you said, to proper demonstrate decentralization. We don't even know the person who actually created the code. There are some ideas and all this kind of stuff, but nobody knows. And I think the more you study, exactly like you said, all the benefits and all the points, I mean, you have to become someone who, I mean, depends on your goal, of course, because people have different maybe goals, but if you are someone who's truly in for decentralization, for true property and all those things, Bitcoin is the answer. From my perspective. There is nothing better than Bitcoin. There's nothing more portable, more decentralized, more divisible. But when it comes to save and preserve your wealth, I mean, there is no, like Michael Saylor says, there is no plan B. There is no option 2. Like, there's no point because anything else is not mine. Besides everything we just discussed, you don't even own it. So yeah, then it's up to you to decide how do you want to manage your financial aspects of your life. But I feel great. And by the way, the most important thing for me, which is above everything, based on my own personal opinion, is I can decide to die with my seed phrase. I can choose to die and not tell you. It's the only thing I can take with me, because anything else, it can be found. Like I can bury gold in some whatever field, but someone can find it with a metal detector, for example. Whether Bitcoin, I can decide not to say anything. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, there is a person who's in jail because he has not told anyone his 12 seed phrase. And he decided, say, okay, you can put me in jail, but I'm not telling you. So that's one of the most powerful things because you control it. I mean, of course.
I think one of the things I preach, like we have these great conversations about decentralization and digital ownership, but I also think that having property rights digitally and having just property rights in general free you to have more time in the physical world. And that's really important because we can spend all this time doing podcasts and editing videos and answering emails and playing games on the internet and all that stuff. But essentially, the reason that we spend so much time as creators in the Bitcoin space or investors and all that, it's really, we just want more time back. We really just want more time. There's nothing, the only thing more scarce than Bitcoin is the personal time that we have. We might be able to live longer by, staying healthy, but ultimately our time on this earth and our time in our current physical states is very finite. And the point of all of this for me ultimately is that I want to tell this story so I can get more people involved in Bitcoin. And if we can collectively decide to use it as a savings tool and we can collectively agree that it is the strongest form of money and start adopting it, then we can get closer to a world where all of us have more time to do the things that we want. This has always been the promise of technology, is to free humanity, to do more creative endeavors, to have more time with family members, to have more personal experiences, to get closer to this like beautiful, amazing planet of ours that, it's sad that like some people very rarely get to see even a glimpse of. And that to me is like the ultimate gift that Bitcoin has given me, is to connect me with people, to give me the time to really see and appreciate everything around us and everything that we can create and everything that has been bestowed and created by the people before us and everything that has been on this rock since 10,000, 100,000 years ago. It's hard to appreciate really like the beauty of everything that we've been given when we're constantly working this rat race, and it wears people down and it wears people's faith in humanity. And I see so much of this where I go all over the world or I talk to people and people are down and they think life is pointless and it's not worth living, and they can't see the beauty in anything because they're stuck with blinders on and they're objected to slavery either by others or by their own mistakes, and they just aren't able to fully grasp the grandiosity of like what we've been given. I'm not super religious, and this is getting a little bit deep, but I've traveled to places and I've learned about different cultures, and I've seen all the art that people can create, and I've seen beautiful history, and I've seen really dark history, and I've seen areas of the earth that can only be described as like otherworldly. And I want those experiences for everyone. I think when you have those, you can only have faith in humanity. You can't live as a cynical person once you've gone out and you've explored, the whole earth and all the beauty that it's had. And we need more of that. We need to give people more time to do that, because out of that beauty and that appreciation of beauty is really where we see the best art form and the best, kind of like testaments to what we've been given. So that's the beauty in Bitcoin for me. And that's why I do what I do. And it just gets reinforced every time I make a new film. I see people see my perspective a little bit more on this stuff and get out there.
I also believe time is the most precious currencies, and I think we need to kind of stop. I call it get cosmic sometimes. I mean, I'm not religious myself, but in essence, I think experiencing life is probably one of the most beautiful things ever. We get into our routine, we sleepwalk into our set of habits we do every day. And sometimes, like you said, just because something happened to you today or it happened yesterday, these too will pass, whatever that might be. It could be something fantastic or something terrible. Try to experience it as much as possible. There's no such a thing as bad days, ideally, because you will want to, they're all experiences, right? So the best we can do is just to immerse ourselves in whatever we are experiencing. Traveling is a fantastic way, like you said. I also travel my fair share. I lived in many places, and different languages, different people, different cultures, and different colors, different art, different music, different everything. And, allowing yourself to say, wow, this is just something else. And I came from a small village in the north of Italy where there is nothing but snow and chocolate. So, coming out and seeing those
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it is good.
Snow and chocolate.
Jack, everything I need. But like you said, when you're exposed to some other concept of beauty, it's like, wow, oh my, I didn't even know this was possible. It's something different. So you have to, like you said, super beautifully, allow yourself to embrace it, and just whatever it is, just take it in. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is what life is about. Life is about living, experiencing things, and meeting people like you, talking to each other and creating conversations. Or there's something, maybe that's why I'm talking to you now. I'm thinking why I love so much self-sovereignty and ownership, because I don't allow anyone to make me angry. Because people say, oh, it's your fault, right? But it's never theirs. It's always you are in control. So you decide to be angry to someone. So they cannot make you angry. Otherwise, they control you. They control your emotions. So, but it's very easy to say, "Oh, my boss today."
I like that perspective a lot.
I mean, it's easy to say now because nobody has done nothing to me. Of course, I'm not the Buddha, so I do get angry. But I try to remind myself every time that happens, when someone steals my parking space or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, if I now allow them to make me angry, then I'm not in control of my emotions.
That radical self-responsibility, it's daunting for people because we are generationally kind of like imbuing certain aspects of our lives, imbuing this idea that we don't need to have responsibility over things. And I think money is one of the most long-standing ones, where we have outsourced the responsibility of money so long to banks, right? Now 3-4 generations have we had, storing the majority of your wealth with a trusted third party, right? Versus storing it yourself and taking responsibility of it. And we look at it like, well, that's a feature, that's a benefit. I don't want to have to think about my gold. I don't want to have to stress about it and all that, but it takes a little bit of something away from us. And what it's created is it's created this whole industry of people that prey on people's, desire for convenience. I'm going to store your money here. I can give you yield for this. I can make your assets do something when you're not around. And it's not good to be in that mindset. And I also think I think one of the most toxic terms sometimes is like this idea of passive income. Like the money is just going to make itself for you. We can just figure out loopholes in the system and your money will just take care of itself for you. And we use terms like risk-free. Oh, like US Treasury, risk-free returns, right? It's like, well, I think we learned a pretty important lesson this year that some people who bought those things didn't escape risk-free. Nothing in life is without risk. So
super well said. Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, Mauricio. Thanks so much for having me on. I really had a great time with you.
Likewise. And thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next one, okay? Bye-bye.